Mana? Mana? Aduh! Yeah!
Just a feeling that I want it behind, because it's something that is just on my mind. I guess it goes that.
Tapi bohong.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Perkenalkan, nama saya Nur Fadila dari kelas A dengan NIM 240608501002. Pada video ini, saya akan membahas pemikiran dari Judith Butler, seorang filsuf dan teoritikus feminis yang memiliki pengaruh besar dalam kajian gender, feminisme, dan teori sosial kontemporer. Pemikiran Butler banyak dijelaskan dalam karya pentingnya, yaitu Gender Trouble yang diterbitkan pada tahun 1990. Buku ini menjadi salah satu karya penting yang mengubah cara para akademisi memahami konsep gender. Melalui pemikirannya, Butler mengkritik pandangan tradisional yang menganggap gender sebagai sesuatu yang tetap dan hanya terbagi menjadi dua kategori, yaitu perempuan dan laki-laki. Latar belakang pemikiran Butler. Pemikiran Judith Butler tidak muncul secara tiba-tiba. Ia dipengaruhi oleh berbagai pemikir besar dalam filsafat dan teori sosial. Salah satu tokoh yang sangat mempengaruhi Butler adalah Michel Foucault, yang menjelaskan bahwa identitas manusia dibentuk oleh hubungan antara kekuasaan, pengetahuan, dan norma sosial. Butler juga dipengaruhi oleh pendekatan post-strukturalis, yang menekankan bahwa identitas manusia tidak bersifat tetap, melainkan terbentuk oleh bahasa, budaya, dan praktik sosial. Melalui pendekatan ini, Butler mencoba bahwa konsep gender yang selama ini dianggap alami sebenarnya merupakan hasil dari konstruksi sosial. Teori gender performativity. Konsep paling terkenal dari Judith Butler adalah gender performativity. Menurut Butler, gender bukanlah identitas yang dimiliki oleh seseorang sejak lahir, justru terbentuk melalui tindakan, perilaku, dan ekspresi yang dilakukan secara berulang dalam kehidupan sehari-hari. Butler menjelaskan bahwa identitas gender merupakan hasil dari pengulangan tindakan sosial yang dilakukan terus-menerus. Contoh tindakan tersebut antara lain cara berpakaian, cara berbicara, cara berjalan, ekspresi emosi, peran sosial dalam masyarakat. Ketika tindakan tersebut terus diulang, masyarakat kemudian menganggapnya sebagai sesuatu yang alami. Padahal menurut Butler, hal tersebut sebenarnya merupakan hasil dari proses sosial dan budaya yang panjang. Selanjutnya, ada kritik terhadap gender binari. Butler juga mengkritik sistem gender binari. Gender binari adalah pandangan bahwa hanya ada dua kategori gender, yaitu laki-laki dan perempuan. Menurut Butler, sistem ini terlalu menyederhanakan kompleksitas identitas manusia. Dalam kenyataannya, pengalaman gender manusia sangat beragam dan tidak sesuai dengan dua kategori tersebut. Kritik ini menjadi salah satu kontribusi penting Butler dalam membuka diskusi mengenai keragaman identitas gender dalam masyarakat modern. Heteronormativity. Konsep penting lain dalam pemikiran Butler adalah heteronormativity. Heteronormativity adalah sistem norma sosial yang menganggap bahwa hubungan heteroseksual antara laki-laki dan perempuan merupakan bentuk hubungan yang paling normal dan paling benar. Dalam sistem ini, masyarakat seringkali mengharapkan bahwa laki-laki harus maskulin, perempuan harus feminin. Hubungannya ideal adalah hubungan antara laki-laki dan perempuan. Menurut Butler, norma ini seperti dapat membatasi kebebasan individu dalam mengekspresikan identitas dan hubungan sosialnya. Peran norma dan kekuasaan dalam gender. Butler juga menjelaskan bahwa identitas gender dibentuk oleh berbagai institusi sosial seperti keluarga, pendidikan, media, budaya populer, sistem hukum. Institusi-institusi tersebut menyebarkan norma bahwa bagaimana seseorang seharusnya bertindak dengan sesuai gendernya. Norma tersebut kemudian diperkuat melalui berbagai praktik sosial sehingga terlihat seperti sesuatu yang alami. Namun, Butler menegaskan bahwa norma tersebut sebenarnya merupakan hasil dari sistem sosial yang dapat berubah seiring waktu. Versi gender. Selain mengkritik norma gender yang ada, Butler juga menjelaskan kemungkinan terjadinya subversi gender. Subversi gender adalah tindakan yang menantang atau menguncang norma gender yang sudah mapan dalam masyarakat. Ketika individu mengekspresikan identitasnya dengan cara yang berbeda dari norma yang berlaku, maka hal tersebut dapat membuka ruang bagi perubahan sosial. Melalui proses ini, masyarakat dapat dimulai mempertanyakan berbagai aturan yang selama ini dianggap sebagai sesuatu yang alami. Kesimpulannya, sebagai kesimpulan, pemikiran Judith Butler memberikan kontribusi besar dalam memahami bagaimana identitas gender terbentuk dalam masyarakat. Melalui konsep formativitas gender, Butler menunjukkan bahwa gender bukan hanya berkaitan dengan faktor biologis, tetapi juga merupakan hasil dari konstruksi sosial yang dibentuk melalui tindakan, norma, dan praktik budaya. Pemikiran Butler membantu kita memahami bahwa identitas manusia bersifat dinamis dan dapat berubah seiring dengan perubahan sosial dan budaya.
The Cambridge Dictionary acknowledges that something has changed. Okay, so there are many different theories of gender, and mine is just one. Sometimes people who really hate gender name me as the one who made this up, but that's actually not true. You know, in my view, everybody has a theory of gender. And what I mean by that is that everybody has certain assumptions going about what gender is or should be. And at a certain point in life, we ask ourselves, wow, where did that assumption come from? At this point, I'm less concerned about whose theory is right and whose theory is wrong, because the assault on gender is also an assault on democracy. We have the power and the freedom to make more livable lives for ourselves, where bodies can be more free to breathe, to move, to love without discrimination and without fear of violence. I am Judith Butler, distinguished professor in the graduate school at the University of California at Berkeley. I teach literature, philosophy, and critical theory, and I'm most well known for my 2 books on gender, Gender Trouble and Bodies That Matter from the early 1990s. My work has been translated into more than 27 languages. I insist that what it is to be a woman, or indeed what it is to be a man or any other gender, is an open-ended question. We have a whole range of differences, biological in nature, so I don't deny them. But I don't think they determine who we are in some sort of final way. At the heart of these controversies is the distinction between sex and gender. But what is that distinction? How do we think about it? Sex is generally a category that is assigned to infants that has importance within medical and legal worlds. Gender is a mix of cultural norms, historical formations, family influence, psychic realities, desires and wishes, and we have a say in that. My early life was affected by the 1960s and the social movements that took shape during that time. I grew up on the east side of Cleveland, part of a Jewish community, and by the time I was in high school, I was politically active, but I was also taking university courses in philosophy. In my 20s, I came to see that it was not just the Jews who were apprehended and extinguished by the Nazi regime. It was queer people, it was gay, lesbian people, it was people with disabilities, people with illnesses, Polish workers, communists, And my sense was that one needed to widen the lens and see that many people have been subject to genocidal politics, and to understand that there are different forms of oppression. I remain convinced that one does need to know history in order to make sure it does not repeat, and that one wants justice not just for the group to which one belongs, but for any group that suffers in a similar way. In the 70s and 80s, I was part of a movement of people who were rethinking gender during that time. Queer theory was emerging. It was in a complicated conversation with feminism. Trans issues had not yet surfaced as part of our contemporary reality. So it was a moment in which we asked questions like, what has society made of us, and what can we make of ourselves? There were a number of versions of feminism that I tended to oppose. One of them held that, well, women are fundamentally mothers and that maternity is the essence of the feminine. And then a second one thought that feminism was about sexual difference, but the way they defined sexual difference was always presumptively heterosexual. And both of them struck me as wrong. I was pretty committed to the idea that people ought not to be discriminated against on the basis of what they do with their body, who they love, or how they move, or how they look. All I was saying is that the sex you're assigned at birth and the gender that you are taught to be should not determine how you live your life. Sometimes people point to gender trouble as the inception of gender theory, but people were working on gender before me. Gail Rubin, and Juliet Mitchell, and Simone de Beauvoir herself. Simone de Beauvoir was an existential philosopher and a feminist philosopher who wrote The Second Sex in the 1940s. The basic point was that one is not born a woman, but rather becomes one, that the body is not a fact. She opened up the possibility of a difference between the sex you're assigned and the sex you become. Gail Rubin was an anthropologist and remains an anthropologist who wrote an extremely influential article called The Traffic in Women. What she tried to say was that the family was a structure whose task it was to reproduce gender. And one of the aims it had was to kind of keep heterosexuality looking really normal. And although it was part of feminist anthropology at the time, it allowed us to start thinking about gender as something that could be reproduced, crafted, cultivated, and that there were systems, frameworks to which gender belongs. There was one other dimension of Rubin's work, which was, interestingly, psychoanalysis. She basically said, well, maybe there's a whole lot of repression going into becoming a man, and a whole lot of repression going into becoming a woman, and that one of the things we have to do is to conform with existing gender norms, is to rule out all those possibilities of being, feeling, doing, loving that don't line up with the gender norms that are governing our lives. So anthropology, psychoanalysis, they all had their place in that moment way before gender trouble emerged on the scene. I think at the time that I wrote Gender Trouble, people treated gender as if it was a natural fact or a sociological reality, but they didn't treat it as something that you could make and remake. Perform equality, freedom, justice. And yet we're constantly learning what freedom is and what equality is and what justice can be. And those challenges, right, the anti-slavery movement, the suffrage movement, the movement for LGBTQIA plus rights, I mean, each of those struggles involve challenging people's existing ideas of who's equal, who has the right to be free, and how do we define justice? We are all the time struggling to achieve that goal. We need to reoccupy these notions and show that concerns with racial justice and gender equality and gender freedom are an integral part of any democratic struggle, especially if we want to rethink who the people are and what it means for them to live in freedom without fear.
Let's just wrap up the gender stuff. Unless you want to take a break from gender, you can go back to that. Do you want to let me give you the prompt for the last few
My
minutes?
whole life I've wanted to take a break from gender. I can never take a break from gender.
Get smarter, faster with videos from the world's biggest thinkers. To learn even more from the world's biggest thinkers, get Big Think Plus for your business.